So I thought maybe that I could get you to start back a little bit at the beginning, but we can't have your whole life story, can we, come forward? But there was a point when you weren't a writer and you did something else and then you became a writer. So can you share a little bit about that start of that journey? What did you do before you became a writer? What do you want to say?
Well, I think I've always used writing in many ways, and I loved that when I was in school, in high school, and so on. So I've always quote been a writer, but the way I started doing it professionally and publicly was my son, your brother, said to me when I was 60, he said, "Mom, um, you're 60 years old. Is there anything you wish you had done?" And out of my head, without even thinking, I said, "Write a novel." And he said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, you're 60 years old. What are you waiting for?"
Yeah, like
and
the money question, right?
Yeah, it really was the money question. That's right. And a week later, I was in Hilton Head, South Carolina, went into a Borders store and bought a book called How to Write and Sell Your First Novel. And I
Yeah.
was off and running.
But why do you think that was the thing that flew out of your mouth? Obviously, somebody asked you the question, Kevin asked you the question, and you blurted that out. Really, it sounds like almost a surprise to yourself. I know you'd always been a reader, you still are. Like, what was it, do you think, was the reason why that was the thing you wanted to do?
Well, when I left teaching, I'm of an age that we went to school and we kind of did everything in the box, and there wasn't all that much creativity. And so when I left teaching, and I didn't wait until I was old enough to retire, I just left. And when I left teaching, I did a lot of creative things. I learned pottery until I kept doing that, and I was pretty good at it, I guess. But then I thought, well, what do I do with all these pieces of pottery? I only have so many relatives.
Yeah, I have a couple.
And I loved doing it. And I did things that my teacher didn't even think were possible. So I mean, but the thing was, what do you do with it? And I did some painting. It was all creative stuff that I was doing. And I got into songwriting. And of course, I've always been a singer. And so I had a lot of things that I could do. But after a few years, I guess when Kevin asked me that question, I must have been percolating in my back brain. I don't know, because it was another creative thing that I could do, and same time.
Yeah, and here's what you've done with it. We'll get into what you've done with it for sure. But well, maybe we should say that how many books have you written? Well, let's go to the end and then we'll go back to the beginning a little bit. Hey, how
Yeah,
many books have you written now at this point in 2025 May?
you're having trouble remembering the
I'm like,
date.
what month is this? What year is this?
Yeah, well, I've written 8 books. I've written 4 historical fiction novels about the American Revolutionary War, and then I've written books about famous people and not so famous people. But all 8 of those books, I've come to realize, have something common in them, and it is showing people rise to the occasion when it presents itself. And I really admire people who have bad things happen to them, and then they find a way to move on. And all of those books, even though they're biographical, they're historical fiction, they're all these different genre, but it's about people and how amazing people can be.
That's so interesting because I mean, going back to the beginning, when you were asked that question, what do you want to do at 60 years old? I guess some people could have said, oh, I don't know. I shouldn't really do anything because I'm getting old. And, not that I'm getting close to 60. It's not that old, right? We know that. But there's something in you that said, I'm not done yet. I'm far from done. And there are all these other things I want to do, this thing particularly. So there's this kind of rising up thing that maybe you chose at that time to still do with all
Yeah.
these years that you had and have left. It's exciting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I really was interested in doing creative things. And I think the more creative stuff you do, the more you're tuned into that maybe. And it goes across genre then, and you say, well, maybe I could mix this with this. And it's just we have these brains and they will do amazing things if we just open the door for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you never told yourself, I don't think I can do this. What did you tell yourself at that beginning stage? You went to buy the book. What do you think your thought process was as you started? Was it a hopeful, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out? Or was it, I'm not sure about this. I haven't done this before. What do you think you were thinking back then?
I was very fortunate to grow up on a farm, and farmers learn to do things themselves. And I was in 4-H, both homemaking club and calf club. I took to heart the 4-H motto, learn to do by doing. And when you get to the age that I am now, you realize the impact some of those early lessons had on your whole life. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think that's why I was able to do it because, I'd been raised in that way to, yeah, step up, give it a try. When I first started reading my mother's books, and I was about 11 years old and probably too young to read some of those books, although she didn't have anything too bad for kids. But, she never ever said to me, no, you can't do that. And so there are
Yeah.
a lot of things that when you get to this age and you look back and you realize some places along the way a door opened.
Yeah, yeah, it's easier to see it looking back than it is in the moment how pivotal it's going to be at that
Yeah,
time. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's so neat. So there was a message that you got told, and then maybe you were telling yourself about that you could do this thing
yeah,
called writing or being a writer.
yeah. And then, I mean, you're my kid, and Kevin is my kid, and he's the one who asked that pivotal question. And there's always a part in parents, and I'll bet you can relate to this because you're a mother as well. There's always a part where we never leave that role. We always want to be teaching our children and modeling behavior. And maybe there was something like that in there. I don't know, but I never actually thought of that before. But
Hmm.
maybe, yeah,
Yeah, right. Showing the way. Even though I was an adult at the time, Kevin was an adult at the time. But yeah, we still do watch our parents. So if we think they're good role models, which we do, right? Not everybody has that luck of having parents
yeah.
they're looking towards for that. But we did. And yeah, wouldn't have really thought about you thinking about that either, but it's maybe it was, yeah, something that you always lived your life like that, perhaps to show us what we could do, and you and dad both modeled that, I think. Yeah.
And I think having been a teacher and having taught senior students, I'm old enough that there was grade 13 here in Ontario, and I taught grade 13 English. And I talk about it a lot because I realize how lucky I was to learn through doing that the thing that I needed to do was to show the students how to achieve what they wanted. And so when I write my stories, I want the reader to be able to see what they need out of that. And I want to, for instance, I don't tell them every last little thing when you get to the end of the paragraph. I leave my readers a chance to think of it themselves and say, I know what they're going to do. I bet.
Mm,
And in that way, I, as a writer, engage my readers, and they are not just, sitting there watching television. They are using their brain to think of what might be coming. And so now we're
yeah.
doing this, we're going back and forth.
Yeah, yeah, you're kind of opening those doors for them
Yeah.
to get their brain involved in their thinking and maybe this journey of, rising above or meeting challenges or whatever is something that they can go on as well. That's neat.
Yeah.
So so you bought the book at the Borders store and what happened from there? You just read that one? Did you go and read 10 or what other things did you do kind of laying the foundation for becoming the writer?
Yeah, well, really, it's an ongoing process. So, I mean, I've read so many books about this, and even books that aren't really about writing. But remember Rhonda Byrne and The Secret, and when that was popular, and so on.
Yeah.
And it was kind of basically reach out and grab what you want in the world, and that was a good message. And I just tried to read those guys. What was that one? Bird by Bird. That was an interesting
Yeah.
one too.
Anne Lamott. Yeah.
Anne Lamott. I couldn't think of who it was, but yeah,
Yeah. Very famous book about writing.
yeah.
Still. Yeah.
And the other thing I did is I kept going to events. I flew across the country and went to Vancouver with my son, actually. And I went to um, event that was for writers, and there were all kinds of great people who were presenting there and so on. And I kept doing that. And I went to a place in Niagara Falls, Canada, and a guy had come over from the States and he was running a workshop there. And I met so many great people. So, excuse me. And in the evening, they all met around a fireplace. Anybody who wanted to. Well, of course, I'm a real people person, so I was in there. So I met Barbara Kyle, a Toronto author who's been an actor, and she's just done so much. She has workshops online. I met and talked with Terry Fallis. Who's got 10 books written now, and he's won the Canadian award called the Stephen Leacock Medal. And, I got to sit beside these people in a chair and just have a conversation.
Yeah.
So when I had my first book ready to go, I happened to belong to a big club in London, Ontario, which was a women's Canadian club. And so we had about 900 members, and I got on the speaking committee, the speakers committee, and I suggested to them that maybe they would like to have Terry Fallis on there. Well, they thought that was pretty awesome. And now I knew him, you see. And so
Yeah.
I was able to send him an invitation, and he came, and I picked him up from the train station or wherever, took him to the meeting place, collected him afterwards, and took him back. And I was being very polite. I was not going to bring up about my own writing. But Terry, being the really amazing and kind man that he is, he said, "So Elaine, what's going on with your book?" And I said, "Well, I'm finished it now, and I just have a little more final editing to do, and I'm pretty much there." And I said, "Terry, I wondered, would you read the book and write me a back cover quote?" And he did.
Yeah.
And so I had the winner of the Canadian Stephen Leacock Medal on the back of my first book cover. And it's
Yeah. He opened the door, but you went through, right? You took that opportunity. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the message that I have for other people that, there's far too many times where other people will say no to you. But if you never ask, you won't
Yeah.
the times when they'll say yes, and it'll be fantastic.
Yeah. I think I remember you saying too that when you went to those conferences or those writing classes or groups that you weren't just a passive participant. Like I feel like you said that you would ask a question or you would go talk to the person after that was presenting, or didn't you have like you really took an active role in some of those things that you did to learn, didn't you?
I did, and of course, when I was younger, I was much more shy. But because I grew up in a family where we performed all the time, and we got used to dealing with people, and I mean, I was a teacher, so I got used to dealing with students. So, and I was a singer all my life, and I my mom uh, led us down the road for that. And, a lot of people can't believe that you can get up and do that. But I said to one of the girls that I was working with one time, I said, you know what? She was singing in church. And I said, you know what? All those people sitting out there in church, hardly any of them will do what you are doing. And if you make a little error, don't worry about it because they're sitting in their seats and they won't do what you're doing, but they are pulling for you and they want you to do well. And if you make a mistake, they just want you to pick up and keep going.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and so
yeah,
I forget why I went down this tangent, but that's the person I became. And a lot of your experiences as you go through life make you the person you are
yeah.
when
Well,
you're
we were talking about the boldness you had going to the conferences or the workshops. Like you were an active participant, but you grew those skills over your whole life, basically,
I
to
did.
kind of put yourself out there, be in front of the groups. But what would you say to other people? Because I think some people who do write or want to write, that part scares the hell out of them. Like they would keep their writing to themselves, they wouldn't share it, they wouldn't kind of branch out into the world. Like you didn't have that problem as much, I don't think. But what can you say to those people who do, who need to put themselves out there?
Well, look what we're doing right now. If I were a really shy person, it would be a whole lot easier for me to sit and record my message, just record it with my iPhone
Yeah,
and not have to look at people, but just look at yourself and think of what you're doing and so on. I think we're so lucky today. We have so many things that we can use as tools, and that's one that I think would work really well for people who are much more introverted than the rest of us.
yeah, yeah. Do it by yourself first and then branch out to talking to people from
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, think of what you've been doing with recording your books. Now, all my books are audiobooks, as you know, and when I do them, I go to a small studio here in the city where I live, and that's fine, and I don't have any problem doing that. But you do it in your own home, and you set up a thing, and you just do it. And
yeah.
again, there's nobody in front of you to make you nervous, is there?
No, only the process of doing it. Even something like this, I mean, we probably both are a little nervous, aren't we? Because we know we're being recorded and people are going to watch it and so on. But we have to get over that hump in a way too. But we've always found the professionals to help us do that too, like the Terry Fallises of the world. You mentioned Barbara Kyle. That wasn't just the only time you spoke with those experienced writers. You kind of developed the relationship with those people and reached out to more, and you really surrounded yourself in various ways with experts in the field, or either other learners in the field, like people who are learning how to write, didn't you? Like you found
I
that and
did.
made that. Yeah.
I did. And there's something else in the beginning that I should mention because one of the things you're told, I think it's changed a bit. I think self-published authors are much more accepted now, and many of them have done wonderful things. But when I was doing this about 17, 18 years ago, um, everybody kind of just assumed that if you were self-published, well, you didn't really know what you were doing. And I learned to do by doing. Here we
Yeah.
go again, and that's what I did, and so many others have done. But tell me again what you wanted me to talk about.
I've also forgotten my question. So there you go. Like, let's just go
You
on.
must be my
I
daughter.
know I got it again. It's just the piece around surrounding yourself with experts, like, because yeah, somebody taught me how to read an audiobook. You went to Jack London, I think, right? And you've been working with Jack to help him or have him help you read your audiobook. So in those early days, were there other things that you did to surround yourself with more experts as you, because it took you a long time to write your first book. Maybe we should kind of go there. Like
Yeah,
there were years there where you were learning how to do this. Can you
yeah.
paint that picture a little bit?
That's really interesting you bring that up because my books are around 300 pages, my historical fiction books and so on, and that's what I wrote first. And that takes a lot of time, but my first book took me 6 years because Ron and I would get in the car and we'd go over to the States and we'd go to a fort that I read about because we're talking about the American Revolutionary War and I'd say, hey, there's a fort and the Americans do such a great job of preserving their history. And when you go over there, you can see exactly where that battle took place and you can walk in the rooms and they do a fantastic job. So that's one thing I did was I looked up places that tied in with the times that I was writing about. And every time I was somewhere like that, I asked questions, and you just have to do that. A person like me, I know there are lots of people who don't feel comfortable do that. But I love to go to these places and talk to the people who know way more about it than I do. And then I go back and I think, okay, so that's what really happened. And now, how would that affect my characters? So my first characters were John and Lucy, and he decided to leave his wife behind. They had a farm in the wilds of New York State, and he decided to leave his wife behind, join Butler's Rangers, and fight for the British against the American patriots, they called them at the time. And he left her on the farm 10 miles from another neighbor.
Yeah.
And, so then you get into, okay, these aren't real people, but how would they have reacted? And then you tell the story. And then, of course, all the historical things that you do bring in, they have to be absolutely true and so on. But when you put fictional people in like that, then you can make them who you want. And it's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. So you learned about that time and some of those people, although you made up your characters, like you had to go around and do research really at these forts and wherever you went to learn about that period. Can I take you back though to just why you chose historical fiction to start with? Why historical fiction? Why the Loyalists? Why did you start with that?
That's funny you say that. I historical fiction, an amazing interest of mine for many, many years. And so I've read so much on it that and so much of it. And there's so many authors, their names aren't coming to me right now, but you would know the names. And I've read so many of them, and I wanted to know how to do it. And the other thing is that if you write in the genre that you are so familiar with, then there's all that learning that's in there that just finds itself on the page because
Yeah.
you're familiar with it. And
You
that,
read it. Yeah.
and that was a problem for me when I was going to all different places and trying to get groups, writing groups to work with and so on, is that I wanted to write historical fiction. And in one particular group, I had nobody who did historical fiction, and yet they might do sci-fi, or they might do fantasy or whatever. And those are wonderful genre, and more power to them. But the things that you have to do to write in those genre are different from the
Yeah.
things in historical fiction. So yeah, I'm wandering again, but it's good to get other people's opinion on your work, but you have to think of where it comes from. Oh, that makes me.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, it hasn't all been roses, you know. Um, I went I joined a group north of Toronto, a place called Ajax, and it's called the Writers Community of Durham Region. And they were a big group, and they got great speakers in and so on. And they'd have a meeting once a month, and we would drive down, and your father would go off and find a library, and he'd work on his things, and I'd go to these meetings. Well, I met so many people there, and one of the things that I found my way to doing was going to an event that was put on by an agency, a writing agency, and they wanted you to come and bring, you know, samples of your writing and so on. And this happens in a lot of places where you go. And I thought, okay, I'm going to that. And I went with a friend, and this fellow that listened to them all, he seemed interested in my work. And so he had a few of us that he suggested he'd like to get um, a sample of their writing, and I don't want to say his name because I'm not the person to badmouth people. But what happened? He had a big agency in Toronto, and I sent my book there, and I got it back really quickly. I got his thing back really quickly, and I thought, oh, this is great. And then he said that the first 100 pages were basically crap, and maybe there was something in the rest of it. And I had been a teacher, and I would never have spoken to a student like that.
Yeah.
And the same in 4-H, when you had to give your reasons for judging it, blah, blah, blah. I would never have done that. And I was really angry that he thought that his job was to say what he wanted to say, but in nasty tone.
Yeah. There's no call for that, right?
No,
Rejection is part of the business, isn't it? I mean,
and I don't mind
Phallus
being
was
rejected.
rejected over and over again before, he got his inroads for sure.
Yeah.
It's so common, but you're right. The tone of that is not
And
necessary.
and
Yeah.
you know, I know I've told you this before, but I never even replied to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just thought, I don't want to work with you. And you see, you take your power. That's your power, because there's people out there that are wonderful, the Terry Fallises of the world, and all kinds of amazing people that you meet. And then
Yeah.
when something like that is put in front of you, you have a choice. You can
Yeah.
accept that and let them treat you that way, or you can take your power. I'm the person who takes her power.
Yeah, yeah. So it didn't push you off your course. I mean, it's annoying. You were angry about it, but you told yourself a message that you were going to keep going because you had
Yeah,
some solitude or not solitude, certitude,
yeah,
that
certainly.
you were going
Yeah,
to be able to do this. Yeah, and you did. These many years later, you did, right? So
yeah.
way to go for not getting too caught up in that.
And you know that happens to so many people. And as I say, we're all different. Thank goodness we're all different. We don't all want to be the same. You know,
No.
we don't need millions of Elaine Couglers in the world. We maybe need one, you know, but then we need Beth Cougler, who's not the same.
Yeah.
Beth Cougler Blom. And I I just think you have to take your power and think what you want to do and go from there.
Yeah. So you mentioned going to writing groups and the Ajax Durham group and so on. And all of these people are writing different genres and so on. Like, what did you take from that experience? But what, like you mentioned a little bit of it being difficult because there weren't a lot of other historical fiction writers, but were there things that you really enjoyed about that writers community coming together in those
Oh
types of
yeah.
meetings?
Oh yeah, you know, whenever you get to together with people who like doing what you like to do, it's always fun, you know. And in a big group like that, they would have amazing speakers there, and people who had, oh, I can't remember the name of that book, but I have it downstairs on the shelf of a fella who he had taken a trip. Um, Across the ocean or something. I kind of forget. This is like a long time ago now. But you know, and I got to meet the man and talk to him and just share ideas and so on. And so it's good to get together with people like that. But I am that person who goes downtown shopping and ends up talking to the person who's waiting on me. This happened to us yesterday, and I found out that this lady that was waiting on me in the store, she had now I'm not going to be able to remember the country, but one of those countries that we all know the names of, and we've never been there because it was like Kuwait or something like that, you know. And
Yeah.
she told me the story, and she told me that in that country you can't become a citizen. And you go there and they let you live there. And every year you have to pay a fee and apply again and so on. Well, I had no idea. And you see, so I'm this person that likes to talk to people and find out what their story is.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked elsewhere about being lifelong learners. And do you think that has always served you as someone who's, learned to write and is on the writing journey? Because even just talking to the man at the writing group, you're curious to find out about him and what he's writing. And has that always served you, that curiosity or lifelong learning approach?
Yeah, I think if we want to talk in percentages, maybe I've had 1% of the strangers I've talked to that it hasn't been acceptable or whatever. But I would say 99% of the people that you meet are really, they're going to be nice to you. They're going to be polite. Never mind what we see in the media all the time. It sounds like everybody's horrible. They are not. And it annoys me that that goes on because my experience is that if I talk to people and I can find out a little bit about them, and that lady yesterday was so glad to tell me her story, and she's been here for 20 years. And I had said to her, I said, you have a little bit of an accent, but I said, I don't know what it is. And she said, well, what do you think it is? And I said, well, I know French and I know German and I know Spanish and I studied Latin and English. And I said, it's none of those.
By
And
process of
we
elimination.
yeah, and so we just laughed about it, and we ended up having she wasn't busy in the store, and we ended up having this interesting conversation to both of us.
Yeah, yeah, that's nice. Well,
Yeah.
and a writing group, if we go back to that scene or setting, it seems like a low stakes place to talk to people about your writing and to say, hey, I think I'm writing something, or, the timid kind of start to first say, I'm a writer or I'm writing something. It's not so easy, maybe, for everyone to do that.
It isn't. I know one of the first writing groups that I went to early on in my journey, we had to go around the table and introduce ourselves. And there were probably 20 people there, and they seemed fine, but they all introduce themselves with their first name. And I introduced myself as Elaine Cougler. And I said to them, I do this on purpose because if I'm going to be a writer, I want people to know my name.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, hopefully I changed somebody's mind, but I wanted them to know why I said both my names.
Yeah. I think there's been research on that actually, that women particularly will often only introduce themselves with their first names, and men will often use both. So it is a consideration for sure. You know,
Yeah,
why would we only share just the name that people couldn't use to find us again? Like people
yeah,
need to find us if they're going to buy
yeah,
our books. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you got that
Yeah.
research for
Now,
that.
someone could, someone could disprove me on that, but I'm pretty sure I've read that we do that to ourselves sometimes as women. So let's not.
Well, and just to finish that topic, this was a mixed group. It was probably half and half, if I remember correctly. So the men were doing the same thing.
Yeah, okay. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
let's go back to John and Lucy, your first two characters of your first book. Why the Loyalists? I mean, people say you should write what you know. Like, did you know the Loyalists? Was that a time in history that you were particularly interested in? What was it about, not just those characters, but that time period that
yeah.
really captivated you?
Well, I did know that I was descended from Loyalists. So even though they didn't really talk about that much when I studied history in high school and so on, but I knew that my father's family went back to a place in England called Pillerton Priors. Actually, I didn't know it until I started doing all this research because it part and parcel um, my family and I was learning about my own loyalists as I was learning the history. So yeah, but it just interested me, and I really was never a lover of history in school because it was always, what's the year for such and such, and what are the six reasons why this character or this country did this, and it didn't really speak to me. But what I want to get at was how all those things affected the people. Here I am again talking about the people, I think people are so amazing. So yeah, that's why I picked them. And I don't really remember thinking, oh, I'm going to write about the Loyalists. But somehow, right from the get-go, that was in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. And you stuck with it. You wrote more than one book about that topic too. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I did four books about that, and I loved everyone, and it's an interesting thing because it is at the time of the American Revolution, and I learned a lot that about the British and about things that were done and acceptable at the time, and weren't particularly acceptable to me. In this day and age, but you know how history is, something that is acceptable in the past for people and governments and so on to do is frowned upon today, and there are laws against it and so on. So that was interesting too. For instance,
yeah,
one of the things I learned when I got to the third book, and I brought the characters into north of London, Ontario, and that's where my third great grandparents lived, and I put the fictional book on that land that they had that because her father had fought in the American Revolution, and so it was just kind of fun. Nobody else knows that, but that's where I put it, and and,
yeah,
and I put those people there, and I found out things about them, and I had a map of Missouri Township and had all the roads and all, and the had actually the Indian trails in there. And pardon me for using Indian, but back in that time that I wrote about, I had to use that. But anyhow, I just found it so interesting to see what they did, and then. Um, I'm kind of getting off track a little bit here, but my third great grandmother is the one who had the land given to her because it was her father that had fought. And but when you look at this map, it says William Garner. So what does that tell me? That tells me that she couldn't own land. And we
Yeah.
know that, don't we? And
Yeah.
there it was in black and white. And those people couldn't, those women couldn't own land. And I also found out about somebody that's revered in Canada in education is John Strawn, Bishop Strawn. And he was, they had laid out these things and they had religion, what do you call it, church lands that were set aside for churches. And it was supposed to be for any churches. But John Strawn was Church of England, which we now call Anglican and so on. And he tried very hard not to have anybody unless they were Church of England. Very few of the settlers were Church of England. And that's why we ended up, that's part of the reason why we ended up in the 1837 rebellion, because these people they wanted to worship in their church, but they would be Methodists or they would be something else, you see. And so it was really interesting for me, having grown up in the United Church of the day, to find out that that was the reason for the War of 18, Rebellion of 1837.
Interesting. And now we know that you're passionate about the topic, right? Because your eyes have lit up and because you've gone into the content area of your book basically with that much excitement. So yeah, didn't like history so much when you took it in school, but when you went and did research and explored and immersed yourself in the time, it was really exciting to learn all these things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And I every person that I've written about, we'll get on to some of the others in some of the later podcasts, but every person I've written about, they all seem to have that spark of something that just grabs your attention.
yeah. What about the naming of the characters? Because you said the name Garner, that was your maiden name, and you named the character your brother's name, basically, right? So why did you choose to use Garner as the couple's last name? Was there a decision there to do that?
Well, yes, there was, and I think it was a good decision because down in Niagara on the Lake, there's a man who I found out I'm distantly related to, and he worked at the university down there, um, and he was a writer and he was a researcher and so on. So it was a great person for me to meet. And so actually we never met in person. We still go back and forth a little bit, but we never met in person. But he knew about the Garners, and he had information that he had researched that. You know where Fort Erie is today? Well, that land was Lot 1, Concession 1, Bertie Township. And a man named John Garner was on that land. Now, there were two John Garners, and my relative was not able to decide. There was another one that was just a little further along the lake. But I chose him because in the story, because you could stand there in Fort Erie today and you could look across the lake, and the bridge goes across
Yeah,
uh, from Fort Erie and so on. And I thought, well, I got to do this. And so I did.
yeah,
But it was really interesting to have that family thing. And I should tell you about my brother Doug, your uncle Doug. He went to he was in England for his business, and his son Bart had done a lot of research on the family and so on. And he said to Doug, you got to go to a place like right in the middle of England, kind of where Stratford and Woodstock are and so on. And interesting that, that's where I live, here in
Yeah, in Ontario.
yeah, but he said, yeah, you got to go there because there's a guy there that we're related to. And so Doug was about 15 minutes away and he got somebody to drive him out there. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to cemeteries in England, they're like 800 or 900 years old, and some of them are very much the worse for wear. And Doug went and they had to peel back the leaves and the dirt and everything. And the first grave they peeled back was the man they were looking for,
Wow.
the Garner. And so and then so we had the history, but we didn't have it back further than that because there was a fire and records were lost and that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
so it was fun to have that in my mind because we knew that that guy came to, it was Britain at the time, but across, like it's in the United States now, where Fort Niagara is.
Hmm.
And Fort Niagara, that used to be all owned by England, but when they finally stopped their warring and stuff, they drew the line down the Great Lakes in the middle of the Great Lakes, and so the Americans ended up with that. But fascinating history, and to think that my oh gosh, I don't know, he's about 5 generations back, I think. He was a oh no, I can't think what they called him. Anyways, he was the guy who had all the booze for the soldiers.
Oh,
And
okay. Yeah.
yeah,
A
and there's a terrible,
provisioner of some
yeah,
kind. Yeah.
yeah, and I just thought that was so funny, and so I know I've told, and then I can usually remember the name, but it's really fun when you look that stuff up about your
Yeah.
background, and you find a way to put it into your book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it takes time, doesn't it? Do you think it's part of the reason why it did take the 6 years to get to that first publish of the first book? Because really, like, you had to go around and research and go to places and go to writing groups, and would other people have taken as much time because you really laid that groundwork in all those different ways? Like, it was a real journey then.
Well, and I've taken a lot of time to talk about it today. And I think that just shows you when you start out to do something like this, you don't actually know where you're going to end up or what you don't know what you don't know, and you just have to be wide open to it.
Yeah.
It took me 6 years. The next books took me like 2 years each and so on, which is pretty standard for a book that's around 300 or 350 pages or something like that. But yeah, the first one took me a long time, but and before I was finished it, I knew what book 2 and book 3 were going to be.
I was gonna ask you that, but I didn't know if I should ask you now or in the future. So that's neat. I mean, there was so much that you were doing during that time, but also getting ideas for future books was
Yeah,
part of it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Oh, it was really, I've done a lot of things in my life, and I loved every one of them. But when I started writing and I started doing this, if I'm connecting the dots and so on, and get to the end of a paragraph, and you think, oh my gosh, I really like the way that came out, and you just, it speaks to my heart,
Mm,
you
that's
know.
nice.
Yeah, so now I know I was meant to do that.
That sounds great. I think we should end there.
I think we should too. And I've got a whole lot of other things that I can talk about and tell people about the journey. So yeah, let's stop there.
Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you, honey.